for a very special program of the Venezuelan American Association of the United States, also known as VAUS. I am Michael Skoll, president of VAUS. I would like to welcome all of you to today's conversation with Maria Corina Machado, the leading candidate of the opposition for president of Venezuela. We are grateful to Ms. Machado for taking her time to be with us and to participate in this discussion, and to Pedro Uruchurtu, coordinator of international affairs, for his help. We are also grateful for your participation today and your support of VAUS in these difficult times for Venezuela. The Venezuelan American Association has been promoting exchange between Venezuela and the US for 87 years. During this ongoing crisis, VAUS has been diligent in fostering discussion to spark action. We thank you all for accompanying us on our quest for knowledge and for a better future for Venezuela. Let me now introduce our speaker. Maria Corina Machado is a Venezuelan opposition politician and the leading presidential candidate in the primary elections on October 22nd, if in fact the primaries are allowed to take place. She is the founder and national coordinator of Vente, a centrist party created in 2012. Maria Corina's leadership and widespread support gained her a seat in the National Assembly after receiving the most votes among all candidates during the 2010 parliamentary elections. Additionally, she was presidential pre-candidate in 2012. Today, she is known for her unique voice in Venezuela's traditionally male-dominated political landscape. How well I remember that. Maria Corina is one of the 100 most influential and inspiring leaders in the world, according to the BBC. She is an engineer and mother of 3 children. I might comment further that one of the things the world lacks right now is a good number of leaders like Maria Corina. She is well known and respected in Venezuela and around the world, and she is feared by President Maduro and his cronies. They know well that in an honest election, she would beat the hell out of them. That is why, of course, he has banned her from holding public office, which inevitably has made her more popular than ever. Now, since our program will conclude with a Q&A session, you may write questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of the page, and I will present them. This webinar is on the record. We ask media representatives attending to give credit to VAUS, as well as to the speaker in any coverage of this program. Now, Maria Corina, welcome. How is your campaign going?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm super glad to have this chance to share with you and all the members of the Venezuelan American Association of the US, as well as your Vice President, Mr. Lopez. We are living a thrilling moment, risky, surely, but at the same time full of new hope and building up strength and bringing a country together. I think that's one of our main challenges and what gives me so much confidence in what we are achieving right now and the result of all this journey. Our campaign is going through a very exciting moment because I don't have to describe the devastation the regime has provoked in Venezuela, has generated in Venezuela in the last 24 years. Yourself and all the citizens of the country in our hemisphere are witnesses of what this tragedy of our migration has represents. I mean, when you have a fourth of your population leaving against their will their country because they need to survive or they need to send something back home, it is a proof of what the country is going through, the lack of future opportunities for our young people, and at the same time. Not only this sadness that you see in every Venezuelan home and family, because we don't have our children with us. But in addition to that, the conditions of life in Venezuela and some of survival. You see that nowadays public schools only give classes 2 days a week, and a teacher earns less than $1 a day. So this is only a proof of how tough is living in Venezuela nowadays. And you would think, at least I think the strategy of the regime was that among all these sadness and separation, the country will lose all will to fight. And certainly we lived last year, 2 years before, a process in which Venezuelans were somehow disconnected with any political movement that would arise again towards a change in our political life and towards freedom and democracy. Somehow, from the beginning of this year, the idea of having a possibility of choosing, electing by the people, those of us who are here and those who are around the world, of choosing a new leadership that would put in place a robust strategy to confront the regime, to bring the country together, to identify where are their weaknesses, and also to get every single other stakeholder aligned with their incentives, aligned with this possibility, has awakened the Venezuelan society. And I have to say that I am overwhelmed by the degree of support of people coming out and saying, I want to be part of this cause. I want to be part of this movement that goes well beyond an individual, a leader, or a political party. So I would end this part saying that I realize we have a huge responsibility, that we need to protect and defend the primary process, because, as you said, there's a risk the regime might try to block it. But we are only roughly 60 days away from it. And it has turned into a huge milestone to leverage strength and get legitimacy to move ahead in the next step, in which I believe we will go through a hard negotiation process, but that will end up in a victory against Nicolás Maduro. So the world will better prepare for an effective and sustainable transition in Venezuela.
How are you dealing with Maduro's ban on your holding a public office? We know that it's increased your support, but how do you confront a ban?
Well, I was worried, I have to say, because I knew it was coming. And I thought a lot of people might get discouraged. But on the contrary, Ambassador Skoll, the opposite happened. I mean, most Venezuelans saw it as a challenge and said, you know what? Maduro is not going to elect the next candidate and the next leader. We are going to do it. So a lot of people that weren't seeing the primary as important as it is, suddenly decided to support it and said, well, it's going to go beyond a competition among different candidates with different ideas in the opposition, but it's going to be a challenge against a regime, and it's going to be the first step to defeat Maduro. So certainly it is another obstacle that we will need to face, but we're going by one. We have many other obstacles regarding a transition process. So as you said, I feel today a stronger and deeper support than I had before the regime committed that, I think, mistake for them.
Now, you've been threatened by the regime and its supporters, right? Directly threatened.
We've all been threatened. I mean, if you live in Venezuela, it is under circumstances of great fear. Venezuelan mothers are threatened every day that they will lose their food stamps and the bag of food that they get supposedly once a month. I mean, Venezuelan farmers are threatened all the time that they won't get the gas they need to move and sell their crops, and actually they are damaged and they are persecuted when they participate in our rallies, in our activities, and people still show up and with more and more strength, and people start saying, as a woman in a mother in Bailadores in Merida once told me, I was telling her that you have to overcome those fears. And she said, what are they going to take away from me? What else are they going to take away from me? There, a bag of food, they took my children, which had to leave the country. So I'm committed, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. So yes, we received several threats to our lives, to my team in different parts of the country, but I realized that it comes from their own fear, because they know they lost their base of support, even in the Venezuelan armed forces.
Well, yes, and one of the things that has happened is that Maduro has raised his rhetoric level. He accuses you of sowing fascism in Venezuela through the use of lies, hatred, and violence. And my favorite new statement is something that surprised even me, comes from Maduro's Rasputin, Diosdado Cabello, aseguró que el chavismo no tiene intenciones de dejar el poder en Venezuela. Vamos a gobernar por 200 años. He assured everybody that Chavismo has no intention of leaving power in Venezuela. They're going to govern for 200 years. Now that goes even further than the kinds of crazy things that Daniel Ortega has said in Nicaragua. What does that tell us about the situation in Venezuela today, the political situation?
Look, I think and I know you've studied this system, which is not a conventional dictatorship, something that we have to understand. I mean, this is a mafia system. I mean, these are criminals, and that established an equilibrium which is unstable. And we've seen recently how certain groups have been, put it on the side or destroyed. Nobody knows where exactly is Tarek El Aissami right now, even though he had been for the last 15 years one of the most powerful people, and recently he was in front of PDVSA. So this is a mafia system, and they need to send messages to their own groups. So at the end, they are showing, and I think this is something new that's been evolving in the last years. They're showing their fear because they know that there are fractures among the different groups and the different mafias. They know they have sacked the country. I mean, they have robbed simply obscene amounts of money, and they need desperately resources to even put in place again their repression network. Even their repression network is failing now. So they need to elevate the rhetoric, and this gentleman you just mentioned has been traveling around the country ordering their most violent groups to attack me whenever I visit different states. So, I mean, it's not surprise to us that he's saying that, but I think it is important to put it in context of what's going on right now, and the fact that the regime desperately needs resources, and that's why they've said they're willing to go to certain degree of negotiation and some compromises. But it's critical, and that this process it's handled properly, because this could be in 2024, the last chance for many, many Venezuelan citizens.
Now, you mentioned negotiations. There are negotiations in Mexico and Havana. What do you think of these negotiations? Is it conceivable that Maduro and his Cuban handlers will ever voluntarily allow a real opening?
Well, I have been very critical of this process. And I have to, I'm sure you're aware, but perhaps remember those who are joining us today, that this is the initiative number 15. I mean, it is not the first time that the regime says they're willing to go through a dialogue process, because it has been very useful for them before. I mean, they've gained sometimes legitimacy, sometimes money, and certainly time every time they go through a process like this. And time for us Venezuelan people means lives that are lost. So that's the urgency that we have. But at this moment, I think we do have the possibility to put in place an effective negotiation. And meaning by effective, it is a process that its result will be a transition to democracy and not maintaining the status quo in place. So I think that in order to have that effective negotiation, you have to have the relative strength on each side should change. Up to now, I think the regime has been in a comfortable position, and part of the reasons should be assumed as a responsibility of the Venezuelan opposition leadership. We have to assume that responsibility, because I think that we had, an approach in which the regime did not have enough incentives to move ahead, and didn't have a credible threat if they did not respect their words and their commitments. Nowadays, things can be different, because we will have a legitimate opposition, a leadership that will have the possibility to represent Venezuelan society on a negotiation table, which is not there right now. And we have a robust strategy that should be shared and channeled together with members of the international community, not only on the political side, but I would say also in the economic and financial side. We need to align the legitimate interests of all stakeholders, and tell them you will all be better off, everyone will be better off in a win-win situation if we manage to move ahead in an orderly and stable transition. And so that's part of our job right now, reaching out to other actors that do have influence in Venezuela. And some of them are seen close to the Maduro regime, but in fact also have a lot to lose or to win if the situation would change.
What should US policy be in this situation?
I think, first of all, should be consistent. We, as Venezuelans, are facing great challenges and great threats. We realize that there are many actors from abroad that are involved in the process. And I'm talking about Russia, Iran, China, Hezbollah, the Colombian guerrilla, the Mexican cartels. I mean, a lot, and certainly Cuba from the beginning. And they are actively acting in Venezuela. We all know that they've even been able to infiltrate our armed forces. And this is a reality. So Venezuelan people, we feel, us on our own cannot face this huge structure. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a huge responsibility. And that's what we are assuming and acting on right now, creating this huge citizen movement that goes beyond a political party, a group of political parties. So I think that we need to know that we can rely on democratic countries especially the US, in terms of accompanying us and leveraging on those issues and assets that regime requires right now, and being able to understand that we need to see these beyond particular or short-term interests. This whole idea of the regime and Maduro being able to help alleviate the energy crisis that's in the Western Hemisphere right now is absurd. It's absurd. Venezuela can and will be a strategic ally, the most important strategic energy ally of the US, once we move towards a system in which we have rule of law, in which we have respect for private property, in which we have open markets, in which we have people living in freedom and democracy. So what I want to be very clear then is we need a policy that is consistent with democratic values, with respect for human rights, for the rule of law, and the support of what is the will of the wide majority of Venezuelans, which is move ahead towards democracy and freedom. In our country, we have the opportunity next year. There are presidential elections that are due to take place at the end of 2024. Certainly they take place almost at the same time as the presidential elections in the US, and that represents an additional challenge. But we need that the US is committed and firm in terms of respecting the will of the Venezuelan people. First, in the election of the democratic leader and candidate for the 2024 election, and second, how these elections actually take place.
Let me turn from the US role to the role of some closer neighbors like Colombia and Brazil, which a while back supported the opposition and stood up against Maduro very strongly. Not so much anymore, particularly Brazil, with Lula actually embracing Maduro. What do you think of that?
Well, when this process in Latin America started to take place, in which some governments that used to be close to the fight for freedom in Venezuela left, and certain presidents that are ideological closer to Maduro came to power, a lot of people were certainly worried because many thought that they wanted to whitewash Maduro's face in terms of all the crimes he has committed against human rights, regarding drug trafficking, money laundering, financing terrorist groups, and so on, which are all well documented in the US judiciary system and trials, as well as the UN missions of human rights and the criminal court in The Hague. And these are processes that are moving ahead and will not and cannot be stopped. Nonetheless, the fact that Maduro has turned toxic because of all his track record has started to put some of those presidents in alert and saying, look, one thing is that we might share, positions from the left, and we join El Foro de Sao Paulo and other groups, but something very different is that we've seen as allies of such a regime. And certainly Lula tried to embrace Maduro, but it was, I think it had a great cost for him, yes, locally and internationally. And I'm sure that many voices in Itamaraty, are, warning about what this could mean for his own position. So today, I think that these governments might be the most interested in Venezuela moving ahead in an orderly transition, in creating the incentives for such a process to take place. At the end, These are countries that are suffering the cost of a huge migration, which is still growing and which will not stop. This is a message I need to convey to every single American citizen, European citizen, and Latin American citizen. It will not stop. Migration will not stop, because when people are starving and when people desire to live with dignity and freedom, they will fight and start for it. So that's what's taking place here, and having this tragedy stopped and starting to reorganize, get away from chaos and have, security, order, and opportunity for all in Venezuela will be the only possibility to stop the effect of migration and even having many of those Venezuelans coming back home.
Well, let us hope that Lula straightens out. At the moment, he looks like a fool, but that's my opinion. Let's turn to another country a little further away, Argentina. Javier Milei, who's from the right in Argentina, came out first in the recent primary elections. Do you take that as a signal of change in Latin America, specifically Argentina?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm very happy with the results of the PASO's primary process in Argentina this weekend. I'm a very good friend of Patricia Bullrich. I admire her very much, and the fact that she
came out number 2 in the
and the fact that she won the internal contest in the pro is also a great signal, as you said, because she has been, a very strong supporter of open markets, private property, rule of law, and so on. So the fact that you have her and Milei come together and you have almost 50% of the country, I think it's a clear sign. And I'm sure they will get along. I'm sure both of them will get along. And I think it will be a great opportunity for change in Argentina. And I'm sure they've learned from recent mistakes so that it will be a sustainable process, and Peronismo and socialism will be part of their history.
Ojalá. Okay.
Ojalá.
Let us turn to the questions now. Let me remind people that if you click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, write your question down. We will I will get to as many as we can. All right, Manuel Mais writes, since Diosdado Cabello is already announcing that Venezuelans abroad will not be able to vote, what will the opposition do about it? There are 8 million Venezuelans outside the country, of which approximately 3 million are voters.
I'm very glad Manuel brings this up, because that's one of our biggest challenges. And it's not only a matter of how many votes actually we will count. It's a matter of getting the country together. We have an extraordinary group of people all over the world that love their country, that long to come back. And we need to organize this into a huge force. And all, of course, having the chance to participate is a great incentive to do that. That was why I insisted in, and it was one of my demands regarding the organization of the primary, to get the possibility of Venezuelans abroad to register and actually vote. And we were able to achieve that. Unfortunately, we had very short time, just a month, and many people did not learn about this possibility. Others were scared because they are not in a regular situation in the different countries where they are living right now, and they still, they all had some fear that this might, bring some consequences for them. But we only had 100,000 Venezuelans registered by the CNE during decades of it's been in March in process, and just in a month we got over 300,000 Venezuelans registered for the primary process. So we will have practically 4 tolls what we had before. I think it's a very important message to have all those Venezuelans around the world coming out the same day, saying how much they care for their country, having, you know, a mother in a small town in Venezuela at the same time that her son in Lima or in Tenerife coming together for a shared dream. It's very powerful, and that will give us the possibility to leverage and say, I said, you know, the next day after a primary, I will call Petro and say, you know what, you know, thousands of people voted, of Venezuelan people voted in Colombia, and you said you believe in a free and fair process in a presidential election. Well, one of the things I hope that you will get from Maduro is, you know, the possibility of all Venezuelans that live in Colombia will be able to vote in the next election. So I think this will be an important, very important element to leverage towards that truly critical accomplishment, which is, as Manuel said, having at least 3.5, 4 million people abroad that have the right to vote.
Okay. Here's something from my board petite. Maria Corina, greetings from New York City. What would be the strategies to break the civil military structure that the regime has generated since the beginning of 1999?
Hi, Mayor. She's a good friend, and I have to congratulate her because she's been, you know, constantly alerting and informing the world of the true nature of the system we face right now. And that's one of the elements that is critical, not only for the transition process. Well, first, to being able truly to defeat Maduro, have a respect for the results, and then the transition process, because we have to realize that over half of the Venezuelan territory is under the control of irregular groups involved in drug trafficking, in illegal mineral extractions, gold and others. So, I mean, Venezuela sovereignty has been totally, you know, diluted, given up by the state. And that's one of the main responsibilities we will have once we reach power. But as she said, the civil military structure has been one of the principal pillars, not the only one. I think the judiciary system is another critical one to give support to the regime. This is a complex process in which many things should be done. Some from here, some from abroad, some are public, some are not. But I would say that what I'm feeling, because as you are aware, I move around the country by car. I'm not allowed to buy one domestic airplane ticket from a commercial airline because they've been told that if they sell a ticket to me, they will lose their licenses. So I've been moving throughout Venezuela in the last 7 years using my car. So that gives me an opportunity to really get to know what's going on. And I have the chance to meet and talk with a lot of military personnel in different levels. And they all have families. They have wives, they have children, they have mothers, and they are at the same time witnesses of the obscene corruption of the very high ranks. And believe me, they also want profound change. And we need to let them know that they are not the enemy, as they've been told by the regime, and that they will be also part of this transformation of Venezuela. So I do have hope in middle ranks and lower in terms of what will happen in the months to come.
Okay, from an anonymous attendee, Juan Guaido was recognized by a very broad section of the international community as Venezuela's legitimate president, and yet he was not able to achieve the effective support required for the transition that he was proposing and leading. He was the last legitimate president of Venezuela. What has changed in your view that would make this new initiative and strategy successful?
It's a very good question. And I would start saying that we have changed, we, the Venezuelan people. In many ways, we understand that we have to be very careful in terms of electing a leadership that we can trust, that will not concede to the pressures of other sectors that might, want to take control of the direction and influence this strategy. I think we recognize the efforts that process of the interim government represented, but also we have identified the mistakes as well. And I think that we, the Venezuelan people of 2023, are not feeling the same of what we felt in 2019. I've mentioned this before in our conversation today. I think that the base of support of the Chavista movement is melting, is disappearing. I mean, the amount of people that show up in our rallies, that in towns and small cities, everybody know each other, and they tell me, I mean, these are part of the club system, and these are part of the UVC, and that's a member of Jefe de Calle, whatever. So that is happening, and it's growing as we speak. On the other hand, I also mentioned, I think there are tensions among the mafia groups. And finally, I think internationally, as I said, lessons have been also taken of the mistakes we've committed. And I think we have now a chance with the primary process to bring all this together and being able to move ahead with a clear strategy, robust strategy with the priorities that we've set, and not conceding and understanding whether we need to go to a negotiation process, which objective is solely the dismantling of the regime and the strengthening of democratic institutions in Venezuela.
Okay, this is from an old friend, Andres Correa. Good morning. For many, many years, Venezuelans begged for the democratic international community to recognize the human rights violations and the lack of state of law in our country. Finally, we had that full support in 2019, and the then leaders did not use it properly. Last year, even the US government negotiated the freedom of the, quote, narco sobrinos, something very hard to believe, to say the least. How would you expect to recover that support when the democratic world is not paying full attention and somehow lost respect for the opposition leader? Thank you. Andres Correa.
I think that's a very good point as well, Andres. Well, we need to bring back respect and we need to build trust. And that's exactly what we're doing. The international community knows very well the track record of different Venezuelan leaders and actors that, we've been in this fight for many years. And at the end, that's my main challenge nowadays, is building trust among Venezuelans and then reaching out to other actors that, as you said, have lost interest because they don't see a true possibility of a regime change. But immediately when they see that it's not only a possibility, but has high probability, then things change. And that's exactly what's happening right now. I've been, contacted by actors that I didn't expect from different countries, even countries that you might think could be closer to the regime. actors that have interest in doing business, legitimate business in the short, medium term in Venezuela. As I said before, from an energy perspective, the U.S. is in a tough position. I mean, fracking is, already went through the picking process, and there's no other country in this region that could bring a perfect match with the U.S. refinery system as Venezuela does. So if the U.S. seriously wants to go through a strategic alliance in a short, medium, and long term, it goes through Venezuela. I mean, we're going to turn our country in the energy hub of the Americas, and not only in oil and gas, but also in clean energies, because we have huge resources in water and wind and solar and so on. So hydrogen. So it is important that all these actors understand that we have built high quality and professional teams of honorable people, very talented, with experience from a wide spectrum of sectors and ideas, and that we will put in place, as I say, an orderly transition that will bring, as I said before, also a win-win opportunity to all. The US government, other Latin American countries, European countries, as well as economic, financial, and social actors.
Okay, from another anonymous attendee, Venezuela is clearly a very important, critical geopolitical piece on the global scene. For whatever reasons, the US and its bloc allowed Venezuela to fall into the hands of the Russia, Cuba, China, Iran bloc. Why would this group now allow Venezuela to join the US bloc, their geopolitical enemy?
Well, I myself have asked that question many times. I mean, you could see this was going to happen a long time ago. But now it's not only a reality, but it's even growing further. Those that have thought that you can contain this process among Venezuelan borders have been proven wrong, as we said. I mean, Venezuela is not an island, and with current technologies in the financial sector or communication and so on, you cannot isolate a country. So yes, you have migration, but you have also narco trafficking that is based on our country, and you have instability to democratic institutions all along the hemisphere, including the US. So one thing that you can do is say, well, we lost Venezuela, and then we have to assume that this damage will come and try to mitigate the effects, but not the costs. And this would be, in my opinion, this is not only naive, but totally irresponsible. We need to solve the source of the problem, the tumor that is spreading. And that requires nowadays much more effort and resources than it would have been to prevent it from happening. But it is what it is. And we are willing to do our part. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. Then we do need the involvement, the commitment, and the support of all others that understand that this goes beyond Venezuela, even beyond the Americas, because it is a geopolitical priority for the security of the hemisphere.
Right. Okay, from another anonymous attendee, what would you do if the CNE does not allow your name to be in the ballot?
Well, that's a question that you can put in this place. What would you do if you could ask a general or whoever is fighting a war that a year and a half before you have your last battle, you lose that? I mean, I will not take that. I mean, we are fighting and we are winning, and we have accomplished a lot. They told me it was impossible to have primaries, and we have them in a little over 60 days. They told us it was impossible to organize a primary without interference of the CNE and the regime, and that's exactly what we're having. right now. And it's been a huge effort from civil society and primary commissions and support from abroad, we have to say. They also told us that it was impossible to have Venezuelans in our diaspora participating, and we have right now. So we are moving, we are winning step by step, and that's only one of several challenges, several barriers we need to overcome. And it is a matter of how much strength we build. So we have a tough process in March. I know that once we win the primary, we will be at another level that will require even more people, even more effort, but I'm convinced that we will reach a point in which the regime, in their own interest, will have to accept that I will participate in that process, and certainly that I will win the presidential election as well.
Ojalá. Okay, here's one from Juan Alvarez. Gracias, Maria Corina. How can we deal with the money that has been seized and will be seized by the US, corruption-related mainly, that is not being returned back to cover for Venezuelan interests, but is merely US income?
Well, it is difficult to answer when we do not have nowadays a clear map of how much money we're talking about, all the assets that are involved, and certainly not, as I said before, the incentives we will build for all, including international governments. I do wanted to say, because I know that there's a great pressure to give resources to the regime right now, that we have to be very careful, because I believe that given the situation they are right now, their only obsession is to stay in power. They do not care about malnutrition of our children, or the young people not going to school, or doctors leaving the country because they earn $15 a month. I mean, they don't care. The money won't go to solve social critical issues. The money they get, if they're allowed to use it freely, will go to repression.
Right.
Will go to repression and persecution. So we have to be very careful, as long as the regime is in power, that they do not get sources that they can use for that purpose. Once we are in power, then it's another story. And certainly, as Juan says, we will need to deal with different countries, proving that there is no better investment that will, exponentially grow, that getting resources into Venezuela's infrastructure, educational and health system.
Can we assume that you have made all of this very clear to Washington, to the US government?
Well, I hope there are a lot of people from the US government listening to us today. And yes, I do have other ways of communicating.
Good.
With not only in administration, but also I have very good friends on both sides of the aisle in Capitol Hill, and certainly in different think tanks and social movements that understand that our cause has to be a bipartisan one, because it deals with the US national security and certainly the US historical commitment to human rights and democracy.
Here's a question from Lucia Kneip. Good morning. What prospects do you see for the implementation of the November 2022 humanitarian agreement? What can the international community do to push the UN and the regime to take concrete steps toward implementation?
Well, I would start by saying, Lucia, that I myself do not have enough information in terms of the scope and the conditions that those resources will be used. And I I simply warn that we are in the face of a critical process in which the regime is desperate to get resources and to use them against the Venezuelan opposition leadership and against especially the leaders of the movement on the base of this on the base of our society. So I first of all want to learn, which I do not have, as I said, all the information, the assurances that this will be used properly, that it would go directly to the most needed, and not as an element that the regime could leverage in threatening or difficulting this process moving ahead.
Okay, here's one from Germán Zárate. Russia's interest in Venezuela seems clear, but China's role is not so clear. What role can China play in addressing the debt problem in Venezuela? Again, from Germán Zárate, the State University of New York at Cortland.
Well, as you say, it's complex, the relationship in China with several Latin American countries. And with Venezuela, it's not only complex, but obscure. We do not have all clear information regarding how the debt with China has been handled. And the other interest China certainly has, not only in oil, but also in different minerals, which Venezuela has huge resources. And what we've said so far is that we in our government will deal in a properly transparent and just manner with every single creditor and potential investor. And I think China, therefore, could have a role in facilitating a transition process, because some people would say from a geopolitical perspective, China could be interested in maintaining Maduro's regime in power in order to have the country close to their bloc. But from an economic and financial perspective, that is certainly not a good deal for China. So I think that's part of the challenges I will have in dealing with them and proving that it would certainly be good for them to help in this transition to take place.
Here's a question that's more of a statement from Juan Alvarez. The problem of 7 million plus Venezuelan expats is a civil holocaust. The government is happy squeezing them outside Venezuela as it makes the local government powerful. A word on how these people could be assisted so that these countries really understand the problem and allow for them to be able to work. Many people have immigration issues in all countries. It's terrible. Venezuela opened the doors of the world during the post-war era. This is worse than a war.
That's absolutely true. And what I would say, Juan, is that we do have a good example, which is Colombia. I mean, Colombia designed el Estatuto Temporal de Protección, which I think is an historic element, not only regarding our Venezuelan migration and our crisis, but for the rest of the world, how a country that used to see a lot of Colombians living and coming to Venezuela, certainly in a very long period of time, many decades, suddenly gets, this huge amount of people, and they had two options. One was to reject them and to create barriers, and another was to intelligently and with also integrity, see how they could be involved positively in Colombians' own interest. And they managed to do that. And I am very grateful to the people of Colombia and the government of President Duque and the fact that the new government has kept this process. But I understand one's urgency, and we certainly need to push for other countries to put in place a similar statute. But my main concern is having the possibility of bringing those Venezuelans back to a country that gives them true opportunities to develop their dreams and their life projects. And I am sure, Ambassador Skoll, that as soon as we've managed to defeat this regime, we will see thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans coming back because they've learned a lot. They've seen how the world is changing in science, in communication, in health, and Venezuela has every single resource you need to put this in place.
Couldn't agree with you more. VAUS gave a couple of years ago a special award to President Duque for the extraordinary efforts that Colombia has made and now has continued to make to help Venezuelan immigrants into Colombia. Do you have any final comments? We're reaching the end of this now.
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for you because you've been very close to Venezuela, even though it has taken a few years, it's passed a few years since you were physically and responsibly of handling relations with our country. And this is something we really appreciate. And to all the team of VAUS, it is so important to convey this message today. Maduro was able, with a lot of resources and other actors, to convince the world that there was no chance of having a political change in the short term. So this created this whole idea that Venezuela was lost, that nothing, could be done, and Venezuela started lowering in U.S. priorities. That, as we mentioned before, it's crazy, it's absurd, and it's a huge mistake. So now, the fact that we are all excited about this possibility, the fact that we're getting together, the Venezuelans who are abroad with those who are here, the possibility of having these primaries, in which many Venezuelans will participate, living in other countries, is unique, and we need to take care of it, and we need to transform it into a milestone so the world understands that we are starting a new phase, that there is a real opportunity to defeat the system, that it will not be easy, that is certainly very dangerous, but that we are willing to do what it takes. And that we are, we have our arms wide open, getting all together, bringing people that didn't like politics ever, or young people that just have, age to participate, and also those that were part of the Chavista movement that are totally, disillusioned and are willing to fight with us. So this is something we need to do abroad as well. And this opportunity is unique. And I want you to know that we will follow all the way, as I say, until the end. And we will do things right. And we will see Venezuela moving towards an orderly, stable transition. And at that moment, we will also need a lot of your support and advice, Ambassador Skoll, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Maria Corina. We admire your courage, your diligence, what you are doing, not only for democracy and human rights in Venezuela, but really as a model for the rest of the hemisphere, to say nothing of the rest of the world. Thanks also to our hardworking association team for making this event possible, Linda Calvet, Laurie Dominguez, and Sebastian Lopez, and to Alexandra Bacarizo of the Andean American Associations. We are developing more lively programs for VAUS, and we'll let you know further details soon. If you are interested in joining the Venezuelan American Association, please contact our team via today's invitation. Your memberships make our work possible. Thank you all for participating today. We look forward to meeting with you again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.